Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We here at SBC are delighted to provide to you what we believe is a platform to allow Cs to become a market leader in what we see will be a global revolution towards sustainable movement. First of all, there are a number of issues confronting Singapore. First of all, 300 million tonnes of waste are disposed into the landfills each year. On top of this, 49,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide are emitted into the environment each year through the incineration plants. Ladies and gentlemen, this is simply an unsustainable waste management practice. Fortunately, we've come to you with a number of solutions. Our strategy is threefold and is centred around adding value to the stakeholders, namely the government and our member partners. Our first element of our strategy is a targeted 3-year government-led campaign to address attitudes and perceptions of the Singaporean people towards a global necessity of recycling. This will be done through increased recycling infrastructure, as well as establishing a rewards program to incentivise recycling in Singapore households. The second element of our strategy is to provide recommendations Cs can use to collaborate with its stakeholders in order to capitalise on the increased recycling production. This will take the form of R&D and in particular renewable energy research, and we believe it will establish Singapore as the global epicentre of the environmental sustainable movement. Our third strategy is to use this status as a springboard into facilitating relationships and partnerships with Chinese organisations. We will use this then as a platform to spread our environmentally orientated initiatives throughout Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, what we offer to you today is a strategy. It is effective, it is financially viable, it is feasible, and most importantly, it is sustainable. I will now pass over to Hilary to run us through it.
Thank you, Mel. One of the main challenges we have addressed today is changing the behaviour of Singaporeans in relation to recycling. We must encourage people to recycle more, but also to recycle correctly in order to reduce contamination. We suggest that Cs approaches government agencies to introduce a series of strategies to encourage increasing recycling in both domestic and commercial situations. We'll first focus on our domestic initiatives. The first of these is an EcoMe rewards scheme. This is an optional rewards-based recycling scheme where you receive points based on the amount of recycling you do. Up until now, there have been no rewards-based schemes to do with recycling. If people aren't being rewarded for it, then why would they do it? From now on, we recommend that we distribute a EcoMe promotional flyer alongside the free recycling bags for general recycling and food waste. If people would like to become an EcoMe member, they can simply follow the instructions on the promotional flyer. If they sign up online, they will receive a participation pack which contains their individual barcode stickers and a EcoMe rewards card. The barcode stickers are very easy to use. Simply fill your bag with either general recycling or food waste and then attach the appropriate sticker on the front. These bags will be scanned and weighed at the sorting facilities, and you will receive a number of points depending on how heavy your bag is. If there is contamination found within your bag, then you will lose points. The points you accumulate can be used to buy products or services at our business partners. For example, we're hoping to get Toastbox involved. We hope that our EcoMe website and smartphone app will be easy for consumers to use and check up on the points that they've accumulated through the recycling process. Our second initiative is the high school advertisement campaign. We intend to run a competition to high school students to create a print advertisement to promote recycling in Singapore. The winning advertisement will win a prize and will be displayed on buses as well as around Singapore as well. The final part of our domestic strategy is a television campaign. Studies have found that the most effective way to motivate people to recycle with advertising is using loss branding. This means highlighting the negative consequences that are associated with not recycling. Our ad campaign would highlight how our landfills are expected to be filled by 2035, and we would also use emotional appeal. For example, using images such as our little baby here in landfills. So hopefully would evoke an emotional response from the viewer. As well as our domestic initiatives, we also have a commercial initiative we would like to implement. We would like to target the food industry because food waste accounts for 10% of Singapore's overall waste, and of this food waste, only 10% is recycled. This is simply not sustainable. We recommend introducing an Eco-Love certification, which can be given to businesses who dispose of their food waste effectively. This ties in directly to our EcoMe recycling scheme. Down the bottom of our promotional flyer, we have stated that we directly encourage our users to only buy food from food outlets and restaurants who support our Eco-Love program. We believe that using our domestic and commercial initiatives will increase both the quantity and the quality of recycling to go through our recycling plants, and by doing so we can harness energy from it.
So increasing our recycling efforts will lead to an increase in our energy production and also lead to expanding renewable energies. But there's also one other thing we need to consider, and that's with the increasing growth, the capacity issues that may come with it. So to mitigate these risks, we see SEAS becoming focused on helping to connect key research institutes and with government funding, specifically in capacity issue solutions. Expanding into renewable practices will include increasing reach and accessibility to Singaporeans. Now, these initiatives may include anaerobic digestive bins, which are placed at malls, universities, and so on. SEAS will also need to keep up at the forefront of alternative energy solutions and upcoming energy sources such as the photovoltaic solar energy and pyrolysis, which is where we think the market is heading. This will ensure SEAS stays at the forefront of being a leader in the industry and will also add value to the members who want to start taking on these initiatives. So we see that SEAS is adding exceptional value to their key members, but what about the goal of becoming a springboard into Asia? Well, first we need to look at where we're going to grow. So China is the largest energy user in the world, and they've had the most growth in sustainable renewable energy solutions. So we believe it is the perfect time to head to China and show these Chinese companies just how much SEAS' infrastructure, knowledge, and Singapore's extra facilities and testing capabilities can really benefit their businesses. We believe this is sustainable with the air pollution crisis in China, as well as the government initiatives that we've already seen in increasing funding. So how are we going to do this? We have three main avenues. Firstly, the Clean Energy Summit, which is an event run by SEAS in Singapore. Secondly, the Chinese Renewable Energy Conference, which is in China. And thirdly, using partnership to increase leverage. So the first stage is really all about establishing those key relationships and building on those relationships. So inviting key businesses and key business members to the Clean Energy Summit, and this will really give them a signal that Singapore is serious about making these relationships, and it will also give them an awareness of SEAS. We suggest inviting companies such as the Chinese Renewable Energy Industry Association, or CREA, investment companies, but also energy companies that are already established in China, such as Rodeo or Chongqing, and these could become potential members of SEAS. The second stage is really to cement these relationships that we've built on at the first stage. So attending the conference will give SEAS a wider reach to Chinese companies that are in the energy sector, potentially increasing membership there, but also it'll give a very important look into the Chinese market, which is going to be crucial for the expansion plan. And finally, partnership. To really finalise and stabilise SEAS's presence in the Chinese market, we believe that the best strategy is to partner with CREA in China. And we believe this will be beneficial to both organisations and their partners, including testing capabilities, market access, and leveraging the skills of the two different organisations. So China is obviously rapidly growing and we need to target them now, but C should also keep in mind the focus on Thailand, Indonesia and India with specific targeted strategies to ensure that Singapore remains the hub for renewable energy solutions.
Alright, so now I'm going to have a wee little look at implementation of our strategies. As you can see on the timeline here, almost all of our initiatives can be implemented within the coming year. Starting off with those actions looking at moving into China, and then we've got the Eco-Love and Eco-Me projects coming in at the start of next year. So how are these initiatives going to affect growth of recycling in Singapore? Well, what we have used as an indicator of recycling in Singapore is a diversion rate. A diversion rate is the amount of waste produced by an area or country which is not put into landfills. And what we've done is we've projected the diversion rate of Singapore into the 4 years coming, and sort of made an estimate of where we think Singapore's diversion ratio will be. We've also come up with an upper bound and a lower bound of this diversion rate. So here we can see this line, which is Singapore's current diversion ratio, which is 61%. There's no historical data, so the line is horizontal. What we've done though is used historical data of California in order to project Singapore's diversion ratio into the future. The reason that we've chose California is threefold. First of all, California has historical data. Second of all, it currently has a diversion ratio which is very similar to that of Singapore. And third of all, California has implemented a recycling program in order to increase recycling. This is a fairly moderate recycling program in that it uses relatively weak methods in order to increase recycling. And as a result, we think that it's a really good method for projecting conservative estimates of Singapore's recycling moving into the future. So as you can see, we've used exponential growth modelling to take California's diversion rate into the future 4 years, and then we've applied this rate of growth to Singapore. As an upper bound for our diversion rate, we've used San Francisco, a city which has been extremely successful in making people recycle more. However, San Francisco has used quite stringent methods, such as making recycling a requirement in law and also fining people up to $500 who don't comply. So it seemed logical to us that because we're proposing less stringent measures than San Francisco, that the diversion ratio in Singapore probably wouldn't exceed that of San Francisco. So here we can see the upper bound of diversion rate moving into 2018. We can see the lower bound for Singapore, which is no change at all. And then in the middle, we can see the projection, our conservative projection using California. Those two numbers there are simply the extra amount of tonnes of recyclables per year, which we would expect in 2018, given the different growth ratios. So how are these different scenarios of growth going to affect the stakeholders or members of CEASE? Well, if there's a high level of growth or a conservative level of growth, we're going to obviously see a lot more recyclables, which our members can take advantage of by increasing plant capacity and investing in more plant and equipment. If we have pessimistic growth, then obviously businesses will have to deal with this by making sure that they are profitable with their current operations. We think this is unlikely though. Now finally, I'm going to have a wee look at the risks which we think our strategy could present. Most importantly is a failure to shift behaviour of Singaporeans. We think, however, that this risk can be effectively mitigated by lobbying the government to put in place legislation similar to that of San Francisco and the UK. So this is measures like mandatory recycling and putting tax on tipping. Now I'm going to hand over to Mel to sum things up.
Ladies and gentlemen, what we have aimed to do today is provide you with a solution. Our strategy is three-pronged and addresses firstly the structural and behavioural challenges associated with recycling in Singapore. The second aspect was to provide recommendations as to how Singapore and CEASE can establish Singapore as a global hub of environmental sustainability. The final aspect was a detailed plan of what Singapore can do in the future to establish itself abroad as a leader in this industry. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe in our strategy. We believe it is effective, it is feasible, it is financially viable, and most importantly, it is sustainable. There is one more question that you have to ask yourselves tonight, ladies and gentlemen. When do we start? Thank you very much for your time, and we'd like to open the floor to questions.
Thank you very much. Quite an interesting presentation. Spent a lot of time on this. I've basically one question. You have not taken into consideration during your presentation the different stages of development of these countries. So if you live in Calcutta, you live on a garbage place. So how do you convince people to get these cards and put barcodes on it, etc.? Compared to Singapore, which is basically highly developed, where you probably have a bit of a better chance. China, tackling China as a country where 1 billion people live, some of them in deep poverty. So aren't you taking a bit too big of a step to go from nothing to, let's say, change the world?
So are you referencing the economy initiative? Is that right, with the barcodes and the bags? Or just
In general, I have not heard you talk about the stages of development of these societies.
So I think, I guess the most important thing with those specific initiatives in terms of like the Eco-Me, which is putting barcodes on rubbish bags and having like the competitions in schools and stuff like that, those things are all very specifically targeted at Singapore, because obviously every place has a different culture and different sort of like economical environment, so you can't use the same measures in a different place. The aim of our China platform is more to create relationships with businesses and governments and the government over there, so that we can ally with them, and perhaps Singaporean companies might want to invest in some of those Chinese companies, or the Chinese companies might want to use some of the technology which the Singaporean companies can provide. From there, in the long term, perhaps we could move to increasing recycling directly in like sort of consumers and everyday domestic people. But the things which we presented today aren't really specifically targeted to China, they're more just Singapore. But long term, obviously, we might want to look further.
I don't know whether you had the data, but I'm a banker, so I'm always looking for numbers. And I've not seen anything about funding this quite an impressive project. So how is this going to be paid for?
So there's two main reasons, because we have thought about funding, but there's two main reasons which we haven't stood in front of you and put a whole lot of figures on the board. The first is that the measures that we're proposing are quite wide-ranging and they're fairly sort of big ideas, so it's extremely difficult to put a figure on. The second is that our ideas do have a lot of reliance on government buy-in. So our ideas are kind of proposing initiatives which the government could take on, and so we feel that if the government is willing to buy into those ideas, that opens up a massive pool of funding, and the amount to which they want to take on our ideas will define how much they want to spend. So for instance, an advertising campaign could cost anywhere between $10,000 and $1 million, and it's not really up to us to say, so it would be kind of dependent on how far the government wanted to go, and that's why we haven't put figures on it, just because we thought it would be so unrealistic to try and just label a figure on something.
First of all, congratulations on coming to the finals. I think that's an achievement in itself, you know. And I suppose most of you are probably first time to Singapore. Okay. So I think it must have been quite a challenging set of circumstances. I have a couple of questions. The first one is actually, again, I also had a question about China, in the sense that you seem to be focusing on China. Have you considered the regional aspect? If you did, what are your thoughts? If you didn't, why didn't you? When I mean by the region, I mean the Southeast Asian region, which is our immediate neighborhood, which has got nearly 350 to 400 million population, which kind of almost mirrors the Chinese middle class, or slightly less than the Chinese middle class. Okay, so I have that one question. If you could first take that.
Sure. Okay, so we absolutely have considered these other Southeast Asian countries, and we are looking, well, we believe SEES should go there, and they are looking at, for specifically in Thailand, they've already had conferences to establish relationships. The reason why we want to go to China now is because we think that it's at such a pivotal growth stage now that if we can get in there, there's just so much opportunity, and we really need to capture that right now because it is growing so rapidly.
Are you convinced that China, which is already quite well advanced in renewable energy, whereas Singapore is not yet, would they really buy into the Singapore story?
We think they definitely would. Partnering with the organisations over there, we think we can offer leveraging opportunities, different skills, different capacities, and also different funding, advice and solutions.
Great presentation, thank you. Couple of questions, we'll start with one right now. Top of mind for me, I'm very much looking at changing behavior. And you talked about that briefly with e-love and e-go-me, right? And sort of the great concepts. That's an incentive model that I got a bit of. I didn't hear anything about the role of government. You briefly touched on it, but one is an incentive-based and one is a regulatory-based. So I'd like to get your view on the government one, and then what's the mix between the two?
Is your question kind of like directed at how we're going to get the government to buy into it, or?
What's the role of government in the regulatory side of it? And number two, what's the mix between incentive-based models and sort of the force fit that government would have when it's not regulatory?
So in terms of the regulatory kind of function of the government, we kind of looked at mitigating the risk that people wouldn't change by perhaps enforcing laws like mandatory recycling and things like that. Obviously, that's not something that SEES can directly enforce or get an organisation to enforce. So the most we can do is lobby for those kind of laws and present to the government a convincing story that they are going to work. And I think the best way to do that is probably to use examples like San Francisco and other countries that have done that. Hilary, do you want to do more on the incentives?
Yeah, I'll just touch on that briefly. So the main reason that we're doing the incentives is that if the incentives don't work, so obviously we want to try doing an incentive approach first. If they don't work, then we're going to use the legislation as a mitigation strategy. So hopefully that we can use the reward system to encourage people to get involved in recycling off their own backs, but if that doesn't work, we might need to take a more stringent approach.
Does that answer your question?
To clarify.
In terms of the assignment deliverables that Edwin has posed to you, if I can just read from here, it says you're supposed to propose a strategy to set local waste recycling, waste to energy industries and the stakeholders on a course to launch Singapore-based firms into regional leadership role, etc. If I was Edwin, I've gone through the IoT Global. I got burnt in IoT Global. You've covered some very broad areas in terms of some of the assignment deliverables, in terms of looking at changing customer behavior, etc. Though a question that I would like to pose, and you may not have the answer for it, but I would have thought that this is something that the board or Edwin will want to know, which is what is the approach and how would you go around setting a business model to ensure that this is financially viable for any business for the private sector to undertake? How much government funding is required? How long is this going to be sustainable for?
Well, this is actually quite a key issue, as in our assignment materials we did see that quite a few companies were actually failing to make a profit, so that's a very good question. I think in terms of getting government funding, it sort of will depend obviously around the capabilities of each organisation. But to ensure a sustainable business model, I think it's to start basic and to look at things that have worked. So we've looked at other initiatives that have worked in other places and seeing if we can apply them here, and also looking at the timing and viability of different solutions.
So I think particularly in terms of like viability and whether businesses can actually go and do those like increased recycling programs, I think what we've really sort of proposed to that is our R&D scheme, where we're saying let's try and convince the government to fund different organisations to look at more effective ways of dealing with waste. Because at the end of the day, if recycling isn't profitable, people aren't going to do it. But I think that waste is an externality which needs to be internalised in some way, so it's either the government who's providing money in order to deal with it, or otherwise you're going to have to look at taxing people putting rubbish in tips even more in order to make recycling more profitable.
Hi, I've got two questions on the topic of waste diversion or recycling. First question would be, given that we all know it's important to recycle and the benefits of recycling, both from a tangible and intangible perspective, what do you think are the reasons why it isn't happening as much as it could be or should be happening today? What are these barriers, and how would your suggested strategies help to overcome some of these barriers?
Just quickly on that, I think the reason that maybe people haven't been recycling so far, especially domestically, is because there just haven't been the reward systems in place. And I feel that the system that we've proposed is going to be quite successful in Singapore, because I think they're quite like prospect of, scanning a barcode and then getting the points and then being able to redeem them at their, coffee club or anything like that. So I think that by doing so, it will increase the recycling participation domestically.
Just expanding on that, in the 90s, West London had a big campaign in improving recycling of the region. And they said the primary factors for lack of recycling were first infrastructure to facilitate it, and secondly lack of information. And that's where our campaign is really targeted. We will be sort of implementing more infrastructure and be able to accommodate for the increase in recycling. And secondary to that, we want to, with the flyers that we demonstrated earlier, we really want to raise awareness of the global difficulties facing recycling, and in particular the Singapore aspect.
Could you expand a little bit on your points around infrastructure? Do you see anywhere along the value chain today where there's specific bottlenecks that need to be addressed before recycling can become more rampant?
Yes, I think so. That obviously, a large cost associated with the recycling will be the collection of the recycling, and we believe with this increases that will sort of generate a more competitive levels for to attain the recycling, which companies can then flow on to the anaerobic composting, and it'll generate we believe a competition, competitive aspect, and reduce some costs for the recycling infrastructure.
Okay, thanks for that. My second question is still on waste diversion and recycling. You've touched on a lot about household waste, so food waste and the likes. What are your views on industrial waste, or in the context of other Southeast Asian and China countries, agricultural waste?
I think in terms of industrial waste, because industry is so obviously it's like profit dependent. So I think things like a card to go down to the coffee club and stuff like that isn't really going to work, because the company's looking at their bottom line. So I think the most important thing there is probably implementing taxes on putting rubbish into fills. The question is whether C's can actually manage to successfully lobby the government in order to implement those kind of measures. But I think that's a task which they would want to seriously look at, because I think that's the only real way is financial sort of gain for the businesses.
Okay, I'm still not very convinced. So if I'm sitting here on behalf of the board of C's, so in the end I'm representing the industry here and representing Singapore and the position of Singapore. Now, why do you feel that a country of 5.5 million inhabitants, who can all behave, and we are very happy to find people here as well, as you know. Why would Shanghai, who has 20 million inhabitants, say, okay, Singapore, you do a great job, it also works for us? Or Jakarta with how many? 16 million type of inhabitants, with all different type of classes of people with no homes, with really bad places to live, Why would they be concerned about recycling, all that stuff? So to me, it is very much, why do you think that you can, with this plan, create claim to fame or claim to play on a regional level with big countries like China, India, if it just works here? This is basically a suburb of Shanghai.
So basically, the Springboard for Asia will not be including these initiatives in countries, so this is completely separate. The Springboard for Asia is really targeting companies already over in these countries that are looking at doing energy